good morning all. We are running behind schedule a bit, so I think we just get going. I think this is the last of the panel discussions. As already mentioned, the topic is corporate innovation and driving transformational change. Let's pick up on those last two words, transformational change, which is the key, I think, issue for the discussion this morning. It basically implies a very radical departure from business as usual for businesses. It means a move to a far more pervasive system-wide change, bringing forward a host of new types of innovations, from organizational innovation to new business models to the wide adoption of new technology. So a very broad, if you like, definition of innovation. So that's the topic for the discussion. Clearly, we're focusing really on the role of businesses and corporates within that wider societal process. It is a much broader process of change, but clearly businesses have a clear role and a leading role to play in that process. So let's explore how individual businesses are contributing to that process, but also how businesses collectively are working together on that kind of transformational change processes, as well as exploring how the existing sort of policy framework is supporting that process of change. I'll now turn to the panel and let them introduce themselves. And maybe panelists, if you can give sort of 2 or 3 key thoughts on the topic for discussion this morning. So let's start with Dax at this end.
Thank you, Aled. Morning, everyone. I'm Dax Lovegrove, Director of Sustainability and Innovation at Kingfisher, which is the owner of B&Q and Screwfix. A couple of quick thoughts for you. I suppose we are tapping into transformations that are going on around us. So smart homes is one of the big things on our agenda. The energy efficiency market in Europe will be worth around 70 billion euros in 2020. We want a piece of the action. We are promoting smart home products across our company right now. Screwfix is currently promoting 100 smart home products. That's on the back of customer research, installers, electricians, but also homeowners. There's good appetite that people want connected products, which can bring dramatic carbon and energy reductions. So that's interesting for us. We're waiting for the results. We hopefully will be good results, and we'll get on to the deeper into this sort of promotion, this space. And, you know, after all, smart homes is a bit of an energy revolution that's starting to happen. Number 2, the sharing economy. Kingfisher's been banging on about the sharing economy for years and years and years. Are we now a sharing outfit that no longer sells stuff? No, we are not. We are still a retailer. But there are stepping stones. There's the sharing of know-how, there's the sharing of skills, and then the nirvana is the sharing of products. We are sharing know-how right now. We in France have a clever site to engage customers, to have a conversation on having a conversation around home improvement. So that is going on, and that is a stepping stone into the deeper sharing economy that we want to get into. After all, that again is worth whatever PwC says, $300 billion in the next few years. We want, again, to get into that space. And my last one is the maker movement, these sort of high-tech, open-source DIYers who are clever, bright sparks, prototyping, using distributed manufacturing. I've just come back from an innovation camp in France called POC21, a play on COP21, and these are 100 eco-hackers with various projects. One is an alternative kitchen, low-tech refrigeration, recovering food waste, aquaponics, clever stuff. Another one was a closed loop, a loop shower, recycling wastewater. Another one was flat pack equipment for urban farming. These are trends that we can see coming our way. And so engaging with the maker movement is another thing that we're doing. So these are things we are tapping into. It takes time, but we're sort of making progress.
Great, thanks, Dax. Claudine.
I'm Claudine Blamey, Head of Sustainability and Stewardship at the Crown Estate. There's a few things going on in the built environment that's quite exciting. Materials. Obviously, there's material scarcity, so we need to do something about this, and we need to think long term. So thinking sort of around 2050 is starting to emerge in this area. One of the exciting things, as I was looking at 2050, I discovered that's happening today, is that we're actually using 3D printers. There's a chap using 3D printers in China printing houses. And he's built 21 houses by just 3D printing, which is amazing. Fantastic technology that's going to, I think, revolutionize construction. The other one is we tapping into the circular economy, which means for us, the Crown Estate, we've set ourselves a target of there's no waste, there's no such thing as waste. So we will use and reuse everything we can, or at least encourage the economy and our supply chain to do that. So things like designing buildings to dismantle it and not to demolish it. That's been going on, but it's really taking shape now and it's becoming very serious. The other one is zero carbon economy. We've heard a lot about that. But what does that mean in terms of the built environment and in terms of our buildings? We've got a fuel cell technology that's connected 4 of our buildings together. That's one of a kind in Europe at the moment because it's a huge one. It was built in America. We went through a huge amount of problems to get it into place and actually to commission it, which is another point around how complicated some of these technologies are, and the fact that somebody builds it, an engineer puts it in place, and then the people that are managing those buildings have no idea how it works. So again, we are being quite innovative in putting something in place in between those two, when the building finishes and gets handed over to someone to manage it, something in place there for the managers to be able to actually interpret how the building should work and manage it properly. And huge amount of energy saving comes about just because of that small piece of innovation that's gone in. The other one is around health and well-being. We're now starting to design buildings for healthy people and productivity. And that suddenly brings about that change in interpretation of energy efficiency. Oh, that's really boring. Who wants to know about that? Why does it matter to me? To actually, we want you to be healthy. And suddenly, energy efficiency becomes sexy, as we just heard from the other panel, and it becomes interesting for the individual. It's changing the communication, the language around how we make these things more run-of-the-mill and more, I suppose, pertinent for individuals to want to take responsibility. Thank you.
Great, thanks for that, Ulrika.
I'm Ulrika Weising from DNVGL. And in particular DNVGL Energy, and we are helping organizations become more energy efficiency generally, and we also work with governments and institutions trying to evaluate policies and programs put in place to improve energy efficiency. And there's been many studies for the last 10 years showing the potential, the remaining potential for energy efficiency. And what's unfortunately not focused on enough, and especially in manufacturing industry that we mostly work with, is the fact that energy efficiency to many people is equal to investments, is equal to technology. And these studies have shown now that about half of the remaining potential for energy efficiency and decarbonization is linked to how we do things, not the technology we put in place to do things. So behavioral change. And I think that is important if we want to look at a transformational change. We need to look at a transformational change within organization and people, as well as transformational change for technology. And you mentioned circular economy, and I think that within manufacturing industry, there's a huge potential to collaborate across industry sectors. We recently finalized a study for DEC and BIS which was 2050 decarbonisation roadmaps for the 8 most energy-using industries in the UK. And in that work, we evaluate a lot of the barriers for energy efficiency and decarbonisation. And if you look across the 8 sectors we looked at, so we looked at cement, glass, we looked at ceramics, we looked at chemicals, oil refining, pulp and paper, steel, and food and drink. And for all those 8 sectors, many, many, many of the barriers are the same, but many of the opportunities are the same too. And when you talk about the circular economy, one of the barriers in all of the 8 sectors is R&D, and just figuring out what is the next thing that can help industry become more energy efficient and decarbonize. That R&D barrier there's a potential there for industries to work together to come up with solutions for the dilemma of energy efficiency and decarbonization, but also for government to support and policy to support that collaboration and that innovation process. And I think that work showed that potential as well, because we organized a cross-industry sector workshop. And the outcome of that has also been that the industry trade associations at least has come up with some joint statements since that work and are trying to influence government more jointly. And the circular economy, unfortunately, wasn't part of that study, but it was more an outcome that there is a potential there, and I think it's something that we should explore further as well.
Great, thanks, Ulrika. Thomas.
Yeah, my name is Thomas Becker. I'm in charge of the Governmental and External Affairs at the BMW Group in Munich. In the UK, we produce Minis in Oxford and Rolls-Royces in Goodwood and engines in Hemshall, to name our most relevant operations, and some components in Swindon, I forgot. So there are 2 things which are, at the moment, massively impacting our industry. They are both iconic changes, as we call them. One is the transformation of the drivetrain technology. It's the transition to ever higher levels of electrification. The other one is connectivity and digitalization. Allow me a few remarks about the first one. Very clearly, if we want to achieve any of the goals which are discussed for 2020 and beyond, these actually are functions of the market share of electric cars. Because what you can achieve incrementally in terms of improvement of the combustion engine technology will deliver 1 or 2% improvement per year. We are required to achieve at least twice that rate. So at the end of the day, it's all about getting people into electric driving. On our side, what we offer is 2 vehicles which are completely built around the electric drive concept. The first vehicles made of a carbon fiber structure on large-scale production, the i3 and the i8, which are available since some time also here in the British market, and successfully. On the other hand, we will launch until 2016 4 additional plug-in hybrid models, which will all replace the conventional hybrids in our portfolio we have so far. So there will be no hybrid left which is not chargeable on the grid by end of this year, next year. On the other hand, the challenge that we are facing is there are things we cannot do ourselves. On the infrastructure side, therefore, we work intensively with a broad range of partners across Europe and also here in the UK on establishing infrastructure. We do not think infrastructure and charging is a differentiator. It's a factor that people expect to have so that they are ready to consider buying an electric vehicle. It is not something which makes you choose between a Nissan or a BMW. That's why we work with the Nissan guys, the Volkswagen guys, and the others. So this is about partnership. But there are framework conditions which are clearly outside of our control. If you look at the reality of today's EV market, you have a very strong fragmentation. A 3 Series BMW with a gasoline engine you can sell everywhere on the planet. If you look at the United States, you sell electric vehicles in California and on the East Coast around New York and in Florida. You don't sell them in Wyoming. If you go to Europe, you have a north-south and east and west-east divide. We have the Lone Star Norway with every fourth BMW being an electric car already, which is singular on a global scale. Then you have a group of strong leading large markets, which is the United Kingdom, the Netherlands, France to some extent, Denmark. Then you have Germany, which is not where it should be, very clearly, and then you have places where nothing is happening. If you go to China, you have lighthouses like Shanghai and Shenzhen. You have Beijing, but the growing second and third tier cities are a big challenge, namely also with a view to where can people actually charge their car, household infrastructure being totally insufficient in very many places. So for us, this means that projecting how many of those vehicles will we effectively be able to sell 10 years from now is really extremely difficult. And we need to cope with that in many places by further collaborating with external partners and obviously in discussion with governments. The second trend, digitalization, obviously, everybody talks about the autonomous vehicle. Everybody competes for testing them. In Nevada, you are allowed to test autonomous vehicles. We also need an autonomous test track in Germany or whichever other place. The reality is that since years you are allowed to drive on the German Autobahn with a fully autonomous car, and our guys do that every day. You can do that if you have a highly qualified automotive engineer sitting in the car. When it is about actually selling the stuff, things are different. Our new 7 Series has a function where you get out of the car, press a button on the key, and it will park itself. So we are talking about autonomous driving of 7 meters. In that case, you have to go to very many transport ministries and authorities, demonstrate that it really works, because in some places you have laws saying when you engage the engine and the car could move, a foot has to be on the brake pedal. So what will you do with that? So what we need in order to fully mobilize the potential of connectivity is enabling legislation, allowing us to do what is technically feasible in a reliable and predictable manner, and we will need rules of the game to be decided. How will data go out of the car to third parties? Under which conditions? Who will have access to personal data which is produced by the vehicle? Who will be able to use the 4 cameras I have in my car? Who will know how many people sit in the vehicle? The vehicle knows that. You have seat sensors which even know whether it's a child or a grown-up. They are used normally for airbags and safety belts, but they produce data that for some people may be a very valuable resource. So the question is, how will this business be steered from a data ownership, data access, data privacy, competition, liability, transport safety point of view? Will the police be able to get all the data out of the car if there has been a crash? Under which conditions will that be the case? Will the insurers have access to that? No answer yet. Important things to be decided over the next years. Finally, if you take these things together, what comes out are indeed transformational new options which we are seeing. Car sharing in the way we operate it here in London is only possible thanks to the smartphone. It was impossible before. We are integrating electric vehicles in our London fleet. If you go to Copenhagen, last week we launched the first purely electric vehicle fleet in car sharing, 400 electric i3s, which are operated in Copenhagen. And they are operated not by us. They are operated in collaboration with BMW and Sixt by Arriva, which is a UK-based subsidiary of a state-owned German railway company, who also is organizing public transport in Copenhagen and who are seeking to more seamlessly than so far integrate car sharing into public transport. So that is one example where we see significant synergies on the technology, but also on the conceptual and business level.
Great, thanks, Thomas. Nick.
Thank you. I'm Nick Molho. I'm the Executive Director of the Aldersgate Group. We are a membership organisation with corporate members across the UK and EU economy, and with whom we work to develop policy solutions that tackle environmental challenges effectively, but in a way that's also affordable and can deliver economic benefits. So in practice, we focus a lot on climate and energy, on resource efficiency, and on natural capital. I have three sort of quick points to make on transformational change. I think the first one is that there are a lot of corporate organizations on the ground already delivering a certain level of transformational change. There's a long way to go, but there's a lot of quite groundbreaking innovation or sort of commercial moves happening. So, just to name a few examples, the fact that IKEA from September will only be selling LED light bulbs in its stores worldwide at a time where the EU is pushing back its ban on halogens by another 2 years until 2018 is a very positive move forward. You will have heard yesterday Interface, one of our members, who are striving to manufacture carpet tiles, which is a product that would traditionally have quite a high environmental footprint, with significant efforts to cut waste, minimize energy use and emissions. Another one of our member in the car sector, Jaguar Land Rover, are now manufacturing cars with 50% recycled aluminium. So there is a lot happening on the ground. But the second point I would make is that it will very rarely be down to one corporate organization on its own to deliver transformational change. And Ulrika and Thomas have touched on the importance of collaboration, but you will generally need a significant amount of joined-up effort across an entire supply chain if you're really going to deliver an innovation and deliver it at scale on the market and at a cost that consumers can afford. A good example comes from Jaguar Land Rover. A few years ago, when they decided through the impetus of EU CO2 legislation to switch their cars from steel to aluminium, because that would make the car lighter and reduce CO2 emissions, they'd also realized that the process of manufacturing aluminium was far more energy intensive than the process for manufacturing steel. So they then started looking at how they could have a significant share of recycled aluminium in their cars. And they aimed to be able to source at least 50% of their aluminium from recycled aluminium, and basically realized that the supply chain just wasn't there. And if they were to try and get recycled aluminium from existing supply chain, it would cost them an absolute fortune. So they set up their own supply chain. They worked with an aluminium manufacturer, Novelis, and worked with a range of factories in the UK who produce a large amount of post-industrial scrap aluminium, and created a supply chain of about 20 companies, which now provides them with 50% recycled aluminium, and they're hoping to increase that to 75% by the end of the decade. So that's pretty transformational, but you've had at least 20 businesses and universities all involved in this process. It was a massive collaboration effort. The final point I would make is that there's a lot businesses can do, but there does come a point where policy stability and policy support is needed. And I think that's especially the case when you're dealing with new low-carbon technologies that have a high upfront capital cost. And you can see plenty of examples of that in the low-carbon heat, in the low-carbon power, and in the low-carbon transport sector as well. And I think it was very encouraging this morning to hear Lord Bourne talking about the importance of the low-carbon sector, both in the UK and globally. But I think we mustn't underestimate the damage that retrospective policy changes that we have seen, for instance, in recent months in the UK across the construction sector with the cancelling of the zero carbon home standard, or in the onshore wind and solar sector, can have on investors in the low carbon economy across the piece. Retrospective policy changes can really worry the investment community, can increase the cost of capital and delay investments altogether. I think the good news is that both in the UK and internationally, we can provide the stable policy framework that business needs to continue innovating and deliver technologies at scale and at affordable cost to the market. In the UK, in the coming months, the government has some important decisions to make on the levy control framework, which is the mechanism in the UK that funds clean energy projects. There's a major review of business and domestic energy efficiency policy underway as well. And clearly at an international level, there's a lot that, whilst Paris is not going to be a summit that can deliver everything, and I think we need to be realistic about that, it can do a lot together with some of the various initiatives that the French government wants to introduce to help continue to improve the investment climate for the international low-carbon goods market. So we really need to seize those opportunities.
Great. Thanks, Nick. That's a brief sort of overview of some of the key issues. As in the previous session, please forward your questions via Pigeonhole. I'll pick them up on the iPad. And we'll also start a more open sort of questioning session now. But let me just pick up on a few key issues, maybe with Dax and Thomas first. So, within your organizations, we're talking about significant change here, real transformational stuff. What are the real sort of drivers and barriers you're finding within that process? Ulrika mentioned, the leadership within the organization, capacity and understanding of a significant change process. What's your experiences in that area? Maybe Dax first.
I think we need to, we have trend spotters in the organisation. There's 1,000 trends out there in terms of trends happening with retail and climate change and all the sort of resource scarcity issues that we all think about. And you need to pick out the top 10 trends most pertinent to the business to de-risk the business, but also think about opportunities going forward. So I think trends, identifying those things is huge. Identifying what competitors are doing. Nothing wakes up the board better than when you say, look, our French competitors have got maker spaces in their stores. Our competitors are moving faster than we are on solar. That really helps to shake things up a bit, and I enjoy doing that. And then all the sort of, plethora of smaller, innovative startups that are really emerging and disrupting the marketplace. That's another thing to look at. And I agree, one of the barriers to the circular economy is R&D, and that is a big barrier. We somehow need to engage our supply chain much more cleverly to unlock the circular economy opportunities. So those are sort of some things, yeah.
To take one example, the carbon fiber architecture of our EVs has not been developed within the regular R&D process. So back in 2007, a dedicated project was set up with the aim of developing our electric vehicle concepts based on an in-depth study of the expectations of customers living in the so-called mega cities. From that on, that was a separate project which was authorized to include input and support from the regular functions within R&D and purchasing, which then came up with the carbon fiber concept instead of steel and aluminum. So very clearly it turned out that in order to get the right competencies together, you needed to partner up with companies who have competencies in this field which we didn't have. So this all led to the foundation of a joint venture with SGL Carbon, a leading carbon fiber producer, which then jointly with us, this joint venture established a carbon fiber plant in the northwest of the United States, in Washington State, in order to produce carbon fiber, which is extremely energy intensive, purely on the base of renewable energies, which are abundant in that place and also extremely cheap, cheaper than anywhere in Europe. So based on that, we started the manufacturing process based on carbon fiber, with the next steps taking place in Germany, also partially in this joint venture structure, but also then at the later stages at BMW itself. But very clearly, this only worked due to the fact that it was done in a specific, dedicated organizational framework, which was also equipped with, let's say, some levels of liberty that would not have been available in the case it would just have been done in the line functions, which normally are in charge of body, drivetrain, and the other components. So now what we are doing at the moment is having the technology capabilities developed here, dedicated for just a very small group of products, migrate into the rest of the portfolio. So the aforementioned current 7 series has what we call a carbon core. That means for structural elements, carbon replacing aluminum and steel, which made the current car 130 kilos lighter than the previous one. So this is, if you like, then the cascading of an isolated, not isolated, but dedicated approach into the rest of the organization and the rest of the technologies.
Okay. Maybe turning, I think you've each raised the issue of, working beyond your own organization. The collaboration is becoming more and more important. The limitations of what individual companies can do. Maybe Claudine, Ulrika, Nick, do you want to pick up on some of those points you've made? So it's, what's your ideas in terms of how to support collaboration between businesses, within supply chains, but also businesses and new organisations? There's clearly, for some organisations, it's a radical departure from business as usual. What's your thoughts in terms of supporting that process?
I'm a strong believer in we're not an island, and we've got to work together to achieve more. So for us, we've got a saying at the Crown Estate, if we partner up with someone, we're going to be able to deliver a lot more than we can by ourselves. So I've got a bit of a bugbear around the whole infrastructure thing. I think that we need to think infrastructure-wide in terms of the whole zero carbon economy agenda, that just business or just government or just local government is not going to be able to deliver this by themselves, that there needs to be joined up thinking. And I think we are so far away from that at the moment. But I'll give you a good example around what we're doing in terms of joining up with other organisations to achieve more. The Crown Estate owns Regent Street and St James's, and that happens to span from St James's Park all the way to Regent's Park. We thought, well, Crossrail's coming in, there's going to be a lot more people around the street. It's going to be very, very populated, even more congested than it is today. These people are going to want more green space to go and be happier rather than be in congested street all day long. So what can we do about that? Yes, we've got St James's Park and the other park, the other end, Regent's Park. But what's in between? So we thought maybe we can create a green corridor on this street. And that can be from hanging baskets to creating terraces on existing buildings to joining up roofs on top of the buildings to create gardening clubs and all sorts of things. Bird boxes where we can put webcams in them. We can have an app when people walk down the street. They can see what's going on in the bird boxes. We thought, right, well, that's great. We can do this by ourselves. But what about all the other owners around that? So people that own Soho, others who own Grosvenor, who own the other parts. So we went and spoke to the other owners as well and said, would you like to join in? And they were all very interested. So we've got a partnership now with 4 other owners around Regent's Park and St James's Park. We've also got the GLA, who've become a partner in this. We've got the London Wildlife Trust, who are supporting us from the biodiversity perspective. And we've got lots and lots of people who just phone us every day and want to get involved. So this thing's become this huge thing now called Wild West End. And we haven't even formally launched it yet. So it's got legs, and it's going to get bigger and bigger, and already people are talking about replicating it across other parts of London. That's just a good example of getting people together and how much you can achieve.
Ulrika?
Well, I think one really, really good example of collaboration is the 2 Teams project that was launched by CEPI. CEPI is the European Organization for Pulp and for Forest Product Industry. And what they did, they developed a roadmap a few years back, they realized that they could only achieve a 50% decarbonization with existing technology, making paper the way that they make paper today. So they launched this project that they called 2 Teams, and they created 2 teams that competed against each other, and it was a 2-year project where each team contained people from the industry, academics, and they had to come up with new ideas, like completely new ways of making paper, completely new ways of drying paper. And what they did was they visited other industry sectors. Like, for example, they visited a plant that freeze-dries flowers. Can we freeze-dry paper? They visited steel plants. They visited all these different industries to come up to identify new technologies and new ways of making things. And this was all organized by the trade association. And the ideas as well, because one of the challenges here is IP. And actually, they came up with a model where the trade association actually owns the IP, and companies can buy licenses from them from the trade association. And the winning concepts, so at the end of the 2 years, each team came up with 4 transformational ideas, and the winning concept is called a deep active solvent. Basically, it's a natural solvent that can dissolve wood at room temperature within 30 minutes, which is could be completely transformational of the industry. Of course, this is at lab scale today, so what has CEPI done since then? Well, they've raised money. They've gotten money to this lab in the Netherlands who initially discovered this deep protective solvent that could dissolve wood. And there's EU money coming in, there's different governmental money coming in order to develop the technology into a full-scale industrial technology. So I think it's a really, really good example where a trade association, a pan-European trade association, took the initiative themselves to transform the industry and got the companies in their members behind them, and is literally transforming that industry as we speak.
Great, so two very good case studies there. Nick, you picked up on the wider policy framework earlier in a critical way. These are very good case studies. How does all this come together to actually become a significant system-wide transformational process? And what's the role of government, you think? What are the 2 or 3 key things you'd be looking for in terms of policy and governmental role?
Well, I think there's sort of different aspects of this. So if you are a major company in a particular sector, you can, to a certain extent, dictate a certain level of change within your supply chain. So I've seen Walmart do this in the US on carbon emissions. The example I gave on Jaguar Land Rover earlier, they were the second biggest importer of aluminium in the country. So it was in the interest of the supply chain as well to follow what they were doing. So they were able to get a certain amount of action going. But then I think there is a role for smart regulation, and the word regulation is not always the flavor of the month, but it's got an important role to play. I think the circular economy package, which is one of the priority issues for the Aldersgate group at the moment, is a really good example of that. If you are able to have EU eco-design standards that require products to be more easily repaired, more easily disassembled, reused, recycled, that would really help drive action across supply chains in different economic sectors and make it easier to boost resource efficiency in a more coordinated way. But then I think so that's really more around the supply chain engagement. I think that the broader policy stability point I was making is that when you actually want to drive more R&D and more deployment and scale in new technologies that have a high upfront capital cost, and offshore wind is a good example of that. Electric heat pumps is another good one. You need enough policy clarity so that private investors will invest in R&D in the first place and know that there is a market for their product in 5, 6, 7, 8 years' time. When you build a project, for example, like an offshore wind farm, it takes 8 to 10 years to develop it from start to finish. So you do need, if you're going to start something on offshore wind today, you need to know roughly what the landscape is going to be in the mid-2020s. Otherwise, you're taking an enormous risk on a project with a very high upfront capital costs. And I think one of the issues that at times government policy doesn't always appreciate is the impact of the way policy changes are made on investors' perception of political risks and therefore the cost of finance. And a few years ago, the Crown Estate did an excellent report with about 120 companies across the UK offshore wind sector, which looked at how you could cut the cost of offshore wind in the UK by a third by the end of this decade. And the one key point that came out of this report was that for every 1% reduction in the cost of finance, which is very much dependent on the perception that investors have of policy risks, you would reduce the costs of offshore wind by 6%. So it's got an enormous role to play. It's not just about reducing the hardware, the cost of the technology. A lot of that can be reduced irrespective of local conditions. But local policies have a tremendous role to play in improving the investment context and the overall cost of technologies. And I think that's what needs to come out more out of Paris and of sort of local and national policies in the months after Paris.
Great, thanks. Okay, let's open it up. Questions? There's two at the front. Can you just introduce yourselves and then your questions, please?
It's Gregor Patterson-Jones again from the Green Investment Bank.
There's a microphone just about to arrive.
Gregor Patterson-Jones from the Green Investment Bank. I have a question regarding EV infrastructure. And from a car manufacturer's point of view, who should be paying for this infrastructure? There are a lot of different models. The obvious model is government simply provide the infrastructure. But there's always the chicken and egg situation, as you need to provide as much infrastructure as being needed, and the manufacturers are not going to introduce a certain amount of vehicles into the market until the infrastructure is there, and nor are the people going to use the cars until the infrastructure is there. So there are models developing which take some private sector money, the OEMs, the car manufacturers providing some money on a slightly concessional basis, and then government providing concessional or free money into a package that provides the infrastructure. But the question is should car manufacturers be assisting in financing this? Should it be purely government priority, or should it simply wait until consumers are actually ready?
Let me start with where obviously the need is most urgent. That's in your home. So what we offer is, together with the car, that a company authorized by us goes to your place, takes a look at your electricity network, and then you get the best possible charging option for your garage, be it high voltage or not. So this is what we do directly. We are also involved in a number of collaborative projects, also with our money, on fast charging infrastructure across Europe. So it's this trans-European network approach, where we engage together with everybody else who is having a significant offer of electric vehicles. So this is where we are a direct part of. What we are showing right at the moment in Millbrook at the low carbon vehicle event that Cenex is organizing is another collaborative approach, which also taps on what you presented previously in your presentation, which is utilizing the lighting infrastructure in cities for cheaper access to charging than with dedicated, relatively expensive charging posts as they are in place in many cities today. So using an electricity network which is there anyway, supporting the idea of investing into more advanced lighting technologies, saving money that can then be utilized to put a relatively simple device on the lamppost, which allows to charge an electric vehicle, is one activity in which we are engaging at the moment. Because what we feel, unfortunately, is that there are many critical voices, namely at municipal level, saying we have been actually wasting money by putting electric charging facilities in place which do not pay off because they are not utilized frequently enough. Maybe we also have been putting them in the wrong places. It may not be properly synchronized with parking regimes, pricing of parking in relation to charging. So here we think we need to be innovative in seeking the right mix of high-performance, costly solutions for fast charging and maybe cheaper and more efficient approaches for the slower regular charging, for example. And that's, I think, an important field of action for the years to come.
And the second question?
So yes, this is Peter Sweetman of Climate Strategy. The question I think is to Nick, but anybody on the panel can answer it. Do you think that regulated businesses are innovative? So I understand perfectly why a business that has to produce additional speed and comfort and efficiency in cars is innovative. But I'm not completely sure that I know why a regulated energy utility needs to be innovative. Are they not? And if not, what needs to change?
Very short answers to this, I'm afraid. I'm running out of time.
I think no, I don't think they are known as the most innovative businesses, although I think you do have some good examples. You get different examples in the UK. So I think if you look in the energy sector, the big six have very much been the focus of much media attention in the UK, both in terms of relationship with consumers, but also in terms of their lack of innovation in green infrastructure or their lack of willingness of moving towards greater levels of investment in low carbon infrastructure. And whilst that, I think criticism was definitely valid at the start of the decade, you are seeing quite a lot of change now. So you look at a company like E.ON now, which has made a conscious decision to split its sort of energy efficiency, low carbon business in one arm of the business and its more traditional fossil fuel based investment in another. I think there's a clear recognition there that they need to innovate more and that both business models are actually quite different and hence why they've separated it. And I think ever since they've done that, you see much more impetus behind their low carbon projects, and their latest offshore wind project off the coast of Brighton, I think, is quite a good example of that.
Any other comments on that?
Just have a look at the national grid scenarios. They're really interesting. National grid, heavily regulated, but they're doing some interesting stuff.
Okay, maybe pick up on one question here. So it's the role of, if you like, new actors within this process. There's lots of existing incumbent organisations that sort of follows on from the last question. How do we really make space to grow these new actors? How do existing organisations work with them? You mentioned startups. Are you actively working with startups, or is it more competition? Any quick thoughts on that?
We were part of the UK government review on the sharing economy, where, of course, lots of amazing startups are coming about, and the big debate is how do you regulate them as fairly as incumbents are regulated, and Airbnb and Uber, we've all seen the press. And one thing that came up in one of the discussions was it's so fast moving, it's hard to keep up. You don't want to restrict the innovation, but you want to make sure that the dark side of the sharing economy we all hear about is sort of managed out. And so one theory was principle-based regulation, that somehow there's flex in the regulation, it moves as quickly as the whole industry. So it's a tricky one, but I think we're definitely trying to engage startups, learn from them. Lots of skill sharing sites. The maker movement, very established in the US, know how to do this stuff, coming to Europe now. And we talk with them all the time because we want to learn how do they connect with their communities far more effectively than sometimes large businesses do. So we're definitely engaging. And I think we wish them good luck, but we want to sort of work with them and not be overtaken by some of these trends.
Any other thoughts on that?
I think without startups and the innovation that's coming through there, which is huge at the moment, we were not going to be able to achieve transformational change. So I think they need support. They need policy support, but I think they also need financial support. They need to be able to access capital easily and quickly. There's some fantastic stuff going on, particularly around the circular economy.
Yeah, I would concur with that, and I think that there's definitely a gap in financial support to startups in the low range of money. There's seed money for 5 million, 6 million, 10 million, but the ones who need 500,000 to get started, there's definitely a lack in the financial industry for that type of support for startups.
Great. Okay, I think we've run out of time. Sorry, maybe a discussion over the coffee break would be better. Let me just thank the panelists. It'd be great if you could give them a warm round of applause.